Let's bring in former U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Ivo Daalder. Ambassador, I want to get a sense of Macron's win. How much of a victory is that for NATO? And also with Slovenia and France both pushing back against the far right, what that means for Vladimir Putin?
Well, clearly it was a great win for Macron. As you just were mentioning, the opinion polls just a couple of weeks ago showed him almost neck and neck in a two-way race, and he beat Le Pen by, 18 or so points. And also, this is only the second time since 1965 that France has re-elected its president. That's a remarkable personal victory for Macron himself, and it bodes extremely well for the coalition that has been built very closely between Macron and Biden, who seem to be able to get along really well, get on the phone quite a bit. That is opposing the Russians here. Clearly, Macron's at the center of the EU. Le Pen, although she later said she wouldn't withdraw from the EU, clearly is not a person who believes in the Union. With regard to NATO, she, while modifying her stances a bit, was going to withdraw from the military command of NATO. That is a huge blow. That's what de Gaulle did back in 1966, and it was only in 2009 that France came back into the military command, and that means that France is much more capable of fighting alongside NATO forces, which now is important because NATO is again an organization that is all about defense and all about opposing a threat from the East. As to the Slovenian election, again, a very positive outcome, with defeating a populist Orban-like figure in Slovenia. And we're seeing that Vladimir Putin, who has bet big time on this war on Ukraine, is losing one battle after the other, not only militarily, as we talked about earlier, but also politically, having Finland and Sweden now wanting to join NATO, having Ukraine really stepping up. And of course, politically, what's happening in France and Slovenia just once again shows Putin calculated, and boy, did he get it wrong.
Mr. Ambassador, so many people obviously are lining up in the West to support Ukraine. And you have thought leaders, politicians, others saying we need to do everything that we can do to help the Ukrainian people, help the Ukrainian military to win this war against Russia. I thought it was very telling this weekend that the SecDef and the Secretary of State went over, and they're no longer talking about helping them survive. They're talking about victory and destroying the Russian military to such a degree they can never go back into Ukraine again. And yet, most pull up when you ask them about NATO becoming members, are Ukraine becoming members of NATO. You do not. It's a stance that sets you apart from most people that we have on this show and most people in the West. You believe Ukraine should be led into NATO. Explain why, and explain why you don't think that will be unduly provocative.
Well, first of all, on the idea of being provocative, when we told the Russians explicitly that not only was Ukraine not going to become a member of NATO anytime soon, but we wouldn't defend it, that's when we provoked Vladimir Putin to actually invade Ukraine. So I think we're now in a world in which strength is the only thing that can prevent Vladimir Putin to do even more damage. And I see a fundamental shift coming about, and the visit of Secretaries Blinken, and showing who I work for, Secretaries Blinken and Austin to Kyiv, really started to make clear what our strategy here is. It's not only to have a free and independent Ukraine, which we've long said, but it is to weaken and ultimately isolate Russia so much that we can't see a repeat of this. And what's the logic of that stance? And the immediate logic is send weapons, allow Ukraine to fight back and beat back the Russian advance. And Clint was talking about how that might be happening in the next few weeks. Well, once you've achieved that, what do you do then? Well, we're going to strengthen NATO. One way we're going to strengthen NATO is to bring Finland and Sweden into NATO, basically bringing all of Northern Europe into NATO, expanding NATO to Russia's border because of what Vladimir Putin has done. The next logic is to say, what's the other big country in the middle of Europe that is not part of NATO yet being threatened by Russia? Well, that country happens to be Ukraine. It was invaded. Once the war is over, or at least the fighting has stopped, giving a security guarantee to Ukraine to make sure that this never happens again, as Secretary Austin said, is exactly the right thing for us to do. Now, I'm not in government, so I can say that more easily than people in government. Yeah. But at least let's start moving in that direction, because what we want is peace and security through having a strong, capable NATO in Europe, just as it's provided security for its current members to do so for its new members as they come in.
Former U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Ivo Daalder, thank you very much for coming on this morning.